we'll be looking at the various blues forms and talking about different ways of walking bass lines over them. This first lesson will deal with the traditional blues form, which is by far the most basic of the blues forms. Another name for the traditional blues is the 3-chord blues. These 3 chords are the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord, and all 3 of these chords are played as dominant sevenths. Before we get into the walking, let's take a quick look at the form. Here we are looking at the traditional blues in the key of C major. It's a 12-bar, 4/4 time progression. The form starts with the 1 chord, C7, for the first 4 bars. It moves to the 4 chord, F7, for 2 bars, bars 5 and 6. Then back to the 1 chord in the next 2 bars, bars 7 and 8. The last 4 bars have G7 for 1 bar, F7 for 1 bar, C7 for 1 bar, and G7 for the last bar, which leads us back nicely to the top of the form. The cleanest way to outline the chord changes is to simply make a bass line using the chord tones. So for chord 1, which is C7, we would simply play the chord tones of C7, C, E, G, B flat. Moving on to chord 4, we would make our bass line using the chord tones of F7. And finally on to chord 5, G7, it's just the same thing. We would make our bass line using chord tones of G7. This approach will create a solid sounding bass line, but it will be a bit dry. Since the traditional blues has so few chords, we need to be careful with our note selection and voice leading between the chords. I would suggest learning a handful of cliched lines to help with your development. I sometimes find walking bass a bit mentally draining, so it's nice to have some predetermined lines that you can fall back on. I'll point out these licks when they pop up in the next example. Also, try incorporating some chromatic passing tones when moving from one chord to the next. many more ways to get through the changes. But for the traditional blues, I suggest you keep it simple. Once you are comfortable with the progression, try moving the bass line a bit further up the neck to get some more range into your lines. And also remember to write down your bass lines. This will help immensely. That's all we have time for in this lesson. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, as always, please feel free to leave me a comment. Thanks very much, and until the next lesson, take care.